Welcome to Living the Faith, your multimedia Catholic magazine for the coffee table of your mind.
Father Thomas Steinke, a priest of the Institute of the Incarnate Word, has returned to the show to talk with us about Pentecost. Welcome back, Father.
Thank you, Ed.
Christ promised that he would send the Holy Spirit to the apostles, to the disciples, to many of them in addition to the apostles. This was a pivotal, we call it the birthday of the church. This was a pivotal event.
If you notice, until Pentecost happened, the apostles were afraid. They were hiding out. They were afraid of the authorities. They were afraid of dying. So what the grace at Pentecost made them fearless preachers, and every one of them eventually became a martyr, except for St. John, willing to lay down their life for the church. He was certainly willing, to die for Christ, and I believe the tradition has they tried to kill him. You don't determine how fearless you are in defending the faith. You don't determine how much you believe in the gospel message. That comes from the Holy Spirit dwelling within you and guiding you about these things. So Jesus said, I will send the Holy Spirit and he will guide you in all these things. Now, like St. Thomas Aquinas says, someone is said to be sent when he comes to exist in someone in a different way. So we say through sanctifying grace, which is a share in the life of God, the Holy Spirit is now dwelling within us. Mm-hmm. So and that's where Jesus says, if the Spirit of God is in you, I will raise you from the dead. That's the key to making it to heaven, this indwelling of the Holy Spirit through sanctifying grace. It's ultimately the only thing that matters. There's nothing more important in your life than staying in a state of grace. Once you're not in a state of grace, Satan will own you and lead you further and further and further down the road to perdition. And you got to get to confession right away and get God right back in your soul. So, and then they also became powerful preachers after that. St. Peter got up and preached, and thousands were converted that day. So your ability to preach is not an intellectual thing. It is more in proportion to your sanctity.
So without this action of the Holy Spirit who filled the disciples at Pentecost in the upper room, and then they went out, they started the church. You and I wouldn't be sitting here talking about the church and being members of the church had this not happened.
Right. Yeah, that was the beginning of the church. And interestingly, I think that's the strategy now is not so much to kill the Christians, but to get them to renounce their faith. Mm-hmm. So I was watching the film Silence, which I don't think has a good Catholic ending, so to say. And the Japanese officials are talking at one point in the movie, and they said, we found that if we kill the Christians and we martyr them, basically, that it doesn't help our cause. They become more fervent and more in numbers. So now what we do is we try to get them to apostatize. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the strategy in this culture of death now. So I was reading that in Ontario, they passed a law in the highest court where if you're a doctor, you have to give referrals for abortion, contraception, gender ideology, or you can't be licensed to be a doctor. In other words, you can't be a Catholic and be a doctor in Ontario. And that's a tough decision for people. Do I give up my job where I'm making 200,000 a year, or do I renounce my faith? And unfortunately, many people are renouncing their faith under the pressure. And we talked in the past time, for sure, this coronavirus and the economy and the plague of locusts and that. You talk to anyone who has a deep union with God, they're all saying that this is a chastisement from God, precisely because this is a chastisement from God. Now, people who aren't in a state of grace says, no, it's global climate change and things like that. But God is in control of the weather. And in the diary of Sister Faustina, I was reading that, and there was a couple of times there's going to be a storm somewhere. Sister Faustina prayed, and he stopped it. God controls the weather and the plagues, and he's in charge of everything. Nothing happens without his permission. And one of the consequences of original sin, and I think it affects everyone, is we have this. Well, the Catechism says it affects everyone. It says that because of original sin, man lost his trust in the goodness of the Father, and every subsequent sin will be that lack of trust in God's goodness. So we have this distorted view of God, and the more you sin, the more you think of God as this, he's out to get me, he's judge, he's limiting my activities, he'll never forgive me. And that's not true. It's a lie. But Satan gets us to believe that. So when I was watching the visionaries for the approved apparition in Kibeho, Rwanda, they said, what's it like to see the Mother of God and talk to her? And they said, imagine how much your mother loves you, then magnify that 1,000,000 times, and you get some idea of how much she loves us. So God isn't out to get us. And even with the chastisements that are upon us, the main reason he's doing it is he doesn't want souls to go to hell. So I was watching a video by Father and Jose Antonio Fortea. He's an exorcist. He wrote a book, Interview with the Exorcist. And he said he thinks there's going to be at least 15 years of unremitting chastisements from God. And the reason he gives, it was in Spanish, he says, El tiene prisa, God's in a hurry. God's in a hurry. He doesn't want all these souls going to perdition. And if Our Lady of Akita is a valid apparition, and it sure seems like it is, at this point, the vast majority of souls are not making it to heaven. There's only a remnant of faithful Catholics in the world right now. That's going to change. I'm hoping this is the beginning of the triumph of the Immaculate Heart.
So God the Holy Spirit comes down upon the disciples at Pentecost. Through Christ's church, gives us his grace, gives us his life, gives us the very life of God. We wouldn't be doing well. We have no chance, as you say, of getting to heaven if we're not in that state of having this life of God in us at the moment of our death. You could say that the purpose of our life is to be that way when we die.
Jesus Christ established the Catholic Church. So if you're a Christian, you're not in a Catholic Church, you know, it's not the same. You do not have the sacraments. You do not have the fullness of grace. So the sacraments are like the fountains of grace. So you go to confession if you're in a state of mortal sin. When the priest says, I absolve you in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, at that moment, you have sanctifying grace. The Holy Spirit's dwelling within you. If you die, you're going to go to heaven. The best way the food for the journey is the Eucharist. So people should receive the Eucharist as much as they can. Now, I think people are getting special graces now by just having a devotion to the Eucharist. So I tell people, look, if you are doing a holy hour online and kneeling and praying, I think you get equal or even more graces than if you were in church. Because look at the devotion and the love you have for the Blessed Sacrament. You're kneeling and watching basically a video of the Eucharist, and that's what That faith and that devotion is what gets you the graces from the sacrament. But the Council of Trent says you can get the same amount of graces from a spiritual communion. And in this extreme situation, I think you are getting those special graces. And that's what I hear. People who are praying the rosary, doing holy hours online and doing spiritual communions, they're doing fine. God is protecting them. He's giving them the graces that they would get if they were going to Mass. Now, once the Mass is opened back up, you want to physically go to Mass. But in the meantime, God will take care of you as long as you're doing your best.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Living the Faith, your multimedia Catholic magazine for the coffee table of your mind. Produced and hosted by Ed Horodko. livingthefaith.website. I'm your announcer, Lawrence Vosper.